We are moving to our theme 2, which is the economic potential of heritage beyond tourism. And we have two speakers in this session which agreed to turn the order of their presentations. So I would like to ask first Mr. Terje Nypan, senior expert at Riksantikvaren, the Directorate for Cultural Heritage under the Royal Ministry of the Environment from Norway. Terje.
Give me a sign when I've done 5,
Yeah.
10, and 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for inviting me also. You know, to speak about the economic potential of cultural heritage outside tourism and to do it in 15 minutes is to be asked to be a kind of a magician. Okay? It's almost like being asked to be an alchemist. So I was going to start with this picture. As you see, the guy in the front is being killed, and it was literally the birth of an economic industry early in the Middle Ages. But I've decided not to start with that. I've decided to speak about this beer can. You can all see the beer can I'm holding, okay? It got confiscated in the security control in Frankfurt yesterday because they couldn't understand why I was carrying an empty beer can. The reason why I'm showing you this beer can, it's a beer called 1664, and it has on the can, it has the flavor of France. And they had a beer can in a limited edition made by different French artists. And this beer can I came over, after I drunk it, I started looking closely at it. And it had drawings of the Eiffel Tower, of Notre Dame, of historic villages, of Mount Saint-Michel, of the Abbaye de Cluny, etc. So what we see in this non-material beer can that none of you can see is actually a branding exercise. So cultural heritage is on the beer can, and of course cultural heritage is in the beer can, since the beer is brewed according to the old German Reinheitsgesetz, the clean law of beer. But that is not what I will talk about. I spoke to the lady from the World Bank. She had to leave. But I will start with a quote from the president of the World Bank. And he says, "Conservation of cultural heritage assets, regeneration of historic cities, as well as the protection of natural heritage are resources for economic and social development. Investment to conserve and integrate them into the sustainable development of local communities can generate income, create employment, reduce poverty, stimulate enterprise development by the poor, or by anybody for that sake, foster private investment, and leverage additional resources for conservation." Every time cultural heritage contributes, this is from somebody else, contributes to artistic, educational, or social development, it is a source of value. And we all know this: aesthetical value, experience value, existence value, for which the production implies economic movement. And not to take this into consideration would lead to a lack of fundamental understanding. This is by Professor Xavier Greff of the Sorbonne University. Now, the World Bank further goes on to say that economic value of a cultural heritage object is a relative value, or rather that's what I'm saying. This again implies that the value may increase with increasing popularity of an object and vice versa. The value will also increase as the object is put to use in an economic production line. The World Bank says the economically capturable values of cultural heritage assets depend on the worth people tend to ascribe to them. Good heritage management, etc., etc., leads to cultural heritage potentially becoming a value-adding industry. Preservation is an essential premise of good cultural heritage management, but management adds value to and builds on preservation, making the preserved assets more accessible to a large number of people. What we have to remember from this quote is that we are talking about harvestable values and harvestable values. Now, if any of you have been doing farming, you know that to get a good crop, there are a lot of things you have to do for which you get no money. You have to plow, you have to fertilize, you have to keep the shrubs in order, you have to tend the earth, you have to rotate your crops, etc. And then you have to do crop rotation. So you have to have some low-yielding crops to support your high-yielding crops. And only then will you get a sustainable, long-term, high yield from your agricultural production. And in a manner of speaking, cultural heritage is no different. You have to invest in a number of things which give no real economic output. And that is the only way you can have objects that give economic output. So, yes, good, thank you, that's about my timing too. We will speak about Nypan, you know, because you asked me to be a kind of alchemist. So how the hell was I going to do this? I thought I would speak about Nypan. Now here he is with some of his business colleagues. He's here to negotiate a business deal in Europe, and he's also looking undercover to see if it might be interesting to establish a production plant in Europe. So, first of all, Nypan, as all businessmen, when they're not negotiating, they are taken around by their hosts. He sees cultural heritage buildings, he sees small villages all over the place, and he thinks to himself that these people are economic and industrious in the sense that they take care of what they have. And he likes this because he feels the people are rooted in history and traditions, and in his experience, the people who are rooted in history are more trustworthy than those who are not. His hosts also tell him about how much money they make on the big monuments, the churches, the castles, the towns, etc. And, you know, Krakow has about 8 million visitors a year. It makes 5 billion euros a year. And Nypan remembers he read in a magazine on the airplane that Europe makes 424 billion a year in 2009 from cultural heritage. But he doesn't like all this stuff about money and all that. He thinks his hosts are too materialistic. This is the folk spirit, this is the soul of the people, this is their history, this is their identity. And why speak so much about money? This is much more important. This reflects the pride and identity of a people. And Nypan thinks, well, how is it if you have a society where there is no overriding national or regional identity? And he knows from his own country that that can be very expensive, with riots and uproars and revolutions and what, you know. And of course, his hosts talk about two great events. The Battle of Vienna, where the Poles were the only ones who came to the assistance of the rest of Europe. Okay, every Pole knows this story, of course, which resulted from the plunder that they took from the Ottomans in the building of this castle, palace rather. And he's also told about the Marxist-Leninist Bolshevik Russian attack on Poland in 1919, which was finally repulsed by the Poles, while all the rest of Europe was sitting by and watching and not daring to do anything. Now he's impressed by this because it tells him something about the resilience, the will, and the ability to improvise that he sees reflected in these historic events. And all these capabilities are good things for business. Now he's also taken around for dinners, which is also quite usual. And he goes to many modern restaurants. Some of them are surprisingly located in old buildings. And many of these restaurants specialized in terroirism, you know, not to confuse with terrorism. That is the taking of old recipes, local products, etc., and transforming them into delicious, high gastronomical dishes of today. And he is surprised also by the number of ordinary people who come and eat in such restaurants. What impresses him really is the creativity, the meticulousness, and the sense of quality that these restaurants and this food gives him. Further, he reflects to himself, these people are quite intelligent because they are keeping their food security up. Because in a world where the raw materials on the market have increased by over 100% in the last 2 years, you need to have something to fall back on when and if the world market collapses. Finally, negotiations are over, the deal is set, but it is not yet signed. Nypan is taken to a historic restaurant, and his hosts tell them that in this restaurant, traders have been negotiating deals since the end of the 14th century. The wine is excellent, the food is too, and after having drunk a couple of glasses of wine, Nypan mellows out and he thinks, well, the deal is fair, I think I will sign it. Now, the second thing that Nypan is looking at without his hosts knowing it is the possibility of establishing a production plant in this area. So, what does he look at? I need to look at my manuscript, okay. So he studies the infrastructures. Thank you, that's also quite according to my timing, thank you. He studies the infrastructure of the region, the roads, the schools, the hospitals, and all the other things which of course are important, but he looks at how the region brands itself. He knows that the image counts in the marketing and for creating attractive workplaces. Let's go back to my non-existing beer can here, okay? The cultural landscape and attractive historic environments are important. Nypan has also found out that such environments are attractive for the specialists from the middle class he needs to attract for his new production plant. They appreciate this kind of environment for leisure activities and the aesthetical qualities. He has heard that historic buildings, when they contain all modern amenities, make attractive lodgings for this group of people. But as he studies these possibilities, he, to his surprise, finds out that historic houses and historic environments are more expensive in the market than modern housing, of course, given the fact that they have amenities. He's not surprised, because in his own country, developers are recreating European historic housing in many of their upscale development projects. And it's mostly the less affluent, the working class, who are lodged in the modernistic living machines without charm. Finally, an extensive offer of environments is important. Not only big and historic monuments, it is the totality. Also the smaller environments, the villages, the small hotels, the small restaurants. And to take care of and improve existing buildings, to him is a sign that the people have understood resource and environmental economics. As this reduces the need for resources and energy for new building material, it also reduces the amount of waste 1,000 times. And such activities rely more on local materials and manpower and secure more jobs and more purchasing power. And that is what the International Labour Organization says. He has read that someplace too. Such foresight and understanding is an advantage for modern production. Finally, I'm coming to the end, thank you. He knows that the heritage also supplies the ideal environment for the cultural and creative sector, which we have been spoken about this morning. His business will need these competencies. They are his suppliers and his potentials for contracting services locally. They are also his designers and his product developers. He has seen for himself that the all-important cultural capital is present in this region, and with other demonstrated positive qualities in the people and society that is essential for future survival, Nypan decides to make a positive report back on the possibilities in this area. I'll just flip through my slides. Great, huh? And this one we cannot touch on. These are all the sectors in which cultural heritage has a demonstrated economic effect. So, in times of financial crisis, the neoliberalists, the bankers, The financiers. Would they take a little baby across the mountain? No. Now this baby would become king later. He did survive. And this is the situation we are in, as Christopher Young clearly told us. We have to protect that which we need in the future, because at one time it will benefit us all again. So let's not kill it, or let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater, as we say. And now it's time for me to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much to you and to Nypan as well. I'd like to ask